Good morning, everybody. So we are doing this Zoom today so we can discuss and I can kind of break down for you guys a little bit about the recent um, court decision and now possible settlement that looks like it's going to be the settlement that's not exactly accepted yet, but NAR has already put out some of the guidelines of what this new settlement will entail. Um, I'm first going to start by possibly kind of breaking down a little bit about what the whole thing is about a little bit, just in case you guys don't quite understand the magnitude of it and what it is exactly. And then we'll talk a little bit about the settlement itself and some of the possible changes, as well as, some of the positives and negatives about it, as well as some of the challenges that we're going to have moving forward. And there's still some unanswered questions, obviously, because it's still so brand new and it's not even accepted yet. But if y'all can see my screen, you can see here that, there's the echo chamber. I like to, say fake news media has you could kind of see here they're all using this same headline, which kind of always, when you see this in the media, you always got to kind of take it with a little bit of grain of salt because you realize that, this has been a pre-written headline now that somebody wrote for them. Um, and we could all speculate, who's pulling the strings behind the scenes or whatever, whether it's the government administration or whatnot. But you see things like this that are super misleading and wrong in the first place. 6% commission on buying and selling a home is gone. 6% fees for real estate agents are going away. 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone. Over and over and over, if you scroll down, you see in this same headline, right? And it's actually wrong. It's a misleading headline in the first place, and we're going to explain why. But that kind of lets you know that that also drives what we're going to sort of talk about at the end of this later, that, this, in my opinion, has been something that's kind of been pre-planned and they are going in and saying that they're doing this big change and that this lawsuit came about to protect the consumer and save home buyers from having to spend as much money um, when buying a home to make homes more affordable, if you will. And actually, what this is doing is actually the exact opposite, if you will. And we're going to explain why. So, just to backtrack a little bit. So, what we what we know is that there was a lawsuit that's already a couple of years old and has just come to a verdict just recently. And this settlement is subsequent to this lawsuit that it was looking like NAR and the big real estate companies were going to appeal, and now they've decided to try to just do this settlement because it's going to cost too much money to continually appeal. And then also there's copycat lawsuits that have now, like, all these frivolous lawyers have jumped in the game to try to also get a piece of the pie. So it was looking never ending. So NAR was almost in the position where they had to indemnify themselves because they were hemorrhaging money. So let's back up. So what this lawsuit came in and claimed is basically that there has been major price fixing with real estate commissions, and that NAR, the National Association of Realtors, that we all on this team belong to because it's mandatory for us that we belong to it. And I have my opinions about that. We'll talk about that later. But um, they they were sued, and these plaintiffs and their lawyers actually got together and said, well, you know, all of these people who sold homes paid upwards of 6% commission to sell their homes. And they didn't know that they were actually paying the buyer's agent commission in that commission. Um, and they shouldn't have had to pay a buyer's agent commission to sell their home. So they feel like they were charged too much and they're suing because of it. So um, really, that actually was wrong. because, speaking from experience, at least on our two states, Louisiana and Florida, in my 10 years of experience, the way we have um, earned our commissions and the way we have operated has been, if someone wants to sell a home as a listing agent, we go to that person and we say, okay, Mr. Seller, we can market and sell your home for you. Here's the different things that we do. Here's the different pictures and video that we take. Here's the different ads that we run. Here's the open house that we do. Here's the social media that we advertise on. This is here's the 3D tour that we do. Here's the YouTube channel that we put it on. We do flyers and door hangers and direct mailings to the neighborhood, all of the different things that we do to market their home. In addition to, we put it on the multiple listing service and we feed that out through an IDX feed that goes to Zillow and Realtor and all these other IDX websites. And as for being on the MLS, we're putting it in front of all these other realtors and brokers out there who are working with buyers that they've qualified and are looking at homes. And as part of our percentage that we're charging you to sell this home, we are taking a cut of our percentage that we're offering as an incentive that we're going to split our cost of doing business with a buyer's agent to entice him to come along and broker and procure a deal with us and sell your home. And so this percentage that you're offering as a buyer's agent split of my commission that I'm charging you, that I'm offering, is to entice a buyer and a buyer's agent to come along and bring their client that they're working with. So in the listing agreement, it spells it out completely. Hey, this is the amount that I'm willing to work for you for, whether it's 6% or 5% or 4%. And here's the percentage that I'm going to offer as a split out of my commission to a buyer's agent. And they signed this listing agreement. So these sellers that are coming and posing this lawsuit that are saying, hey, we didn't know, that's wrong. And it's absolutely false. Now, I could be wrong in some other jurisdictions. I know each state
Where's
does
my
things a little bit differently. Um, but in our jurisdictions, they have to sign a listing agreement, and the listing agreement specifically spells out what the fees are and what the commission split was, right? To me, this has been fair, okay, in my professional opinion. And it's been the standard in the way we're doing things. Also, part of the lawsuit claimed that there was price fixing and that sellers of homes could not negotiate a commission, the commission percentage that they were going to pay to a listing agent and subsequently a split to a buyer's agent, which also is false. I mean, it's always been a negotiable thing. I mean, I know in our experience, if we've got a seller that we've worked with before, or as a friend or family member, or as a builder or investor that we know we do several deals a year with, we absolutely offer them a commission discount for listing with us. If we, I've had times in the past where I've had sellers that have been almost upside down and don't have very much equity, and they can't even really make this deal work unless we lower our commissions. We absolutely go in and try to help our clients make that sale and not have to come out of pocket. So we've lowered our commissions there in certain cases. And also, in the training that we do, and we're going to train this more as a team, um, when we go to a listing presentation and we spell out all the things that we do specifically, like I had mentioned to you before, we do, the pictures, the video, the ads, the printed media, the YouTube, everything that we do to market a home for them. When a seller comes and says, well, hey, can you lower your commission from 6% to 5% or whatever, we've always got the ability to let them decide and say, hey, Mr. Seller, out of the things that I told you we do in a full listing packet, a full marketing packet, are there any things here that you think we could do without in order to sell this home? I mean, do you really need a 3D tour, or do you really need, door hangers or whatever? And if you can do without a few of those things, then yes, absolutely, we can save you a little money because we'll spend a little money, a little less money up front marketing your home. And so I usually put it in their hands. They can decide, well, okay, yeah, I don't necessarily need a few of these things, so we can shave a little cost But if you want a full service listing, if you want a luxury listing, if you want all of these things at our disposal, this is our fee. And it's up to them to hire us or go to the next realtor. And it's also up to us to say, well, no, I'm sorry, I can't lower my price that low. Maybe we're not a good fit for each other. Right. So anyway, so I think, in my personal and professional opinion, that this lawsuit has been somewhat of a frivolous and wrong lawsuit. What they claimed is not true. The price has always been negotiable. It's never been the fixed rate. Okay. And unlike most industries, I mean, as you guys all know, when you go to a lawyer to hire them to draw up some paperwork or to represent you in a legal case, you don't haggle the lawyer over what they charge. They tell you the percentage that they charge and what their fees are going to be, and you pay it. When you go to your tax attorney or your CPA to get your taxes done legally with them and they represent you, you don't haggle with them over what the tax prep cost is going to be. Their fee is what their fee is, and it is what it is. I can't even think of very many industries out there where a service fee is super negotiable and you can just haggle with them. I mean, nothing. You don't go to Burger King and buy a hamburger and tell them, well, hey, I don't want to pay $6 for the burger. I only want to pay two. But for some reason, the industry feels like realtors, and our services are, we can just haggle with us and get us to come down on what it costs to do business. And obviously, as realtors, have a lot of overhead costs, from licensing to all of our different regulatory fees to E&O insurance to MLS fees to driving around and spending money on gas to all the different money we spend, marketing a property specifically. Like I mentioned, a whole list of different things that we spend money on, not the least of which is running actual ads that we can track and see how many people are clicking those ads and things. So um, if we're going to discount our services, we also got to shave some of that cost. But anyway, so I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but the reality is, Mr. Consumer, is that, our fees have always been negotiable and they remain negotiable to this point. So, okay. So nobody thought that this lawsuit was going to stick. For the last couple of years, there's been a lot of murmuring. I've been following it. A lot of realtors and brokerages have been followed, and we knew that it was coming, but we really kind of felt pretty strong, like, well, wait a minute, we're not price fixing, and it's always been in the listing agreement what the split is, and it seems very fair. And for these people claiming they didn't know, then they're lying basically. But when the verdict came down a couple of months ago, they sided on behalf of the plaintiffs. So basically, they have basically ruled that we were price fixing and that the prices were and the commissions were non-negotiable and et cetera, et cetera. So um, this has actually shaken up the industry and got a lot of people worried. And we know that there's going to be some major changes coming in, at least in the way we disclose things and the way we negotiate things and stuff. Okay. So, everybody following me so far on where we are? Okay. So now, just in the past couple of days, we have seen now the National Association of Realtors reaches an agreement, which it actually hadn't been totally agreed and signed off on yet, but they have drafted out a settlement. And if you look at the NAR fact sheet that they put out, you can kind of see why, right, from their position. Um, they explored appealing, like I mentioned before, and they have noticed that, well, okay, if we appeal, it only deals with this case, not any other copycat cases, right? So they're trying to protect themselves from any further litigations by going ahead and appeasing the forces that be and putting some regulatory changes in that are going to change our practice and change the way we do business, negotiate commissions. Um, so some of the big takeaways from this, and I'm going to use this from our brokerage's Motivational Monday. If y'all caught it, cool. If not, you can go back and rewatch it because it was pretty good and explain some of what I'm going to explain here today too. But some of the big three takeaways of this settlement are: number one, um, cooperative commission, in other words, a buyer split, is no longer required. is no longer mandatory. And before it used to be that you had to do a split. It didn't have to be a certain amount of split, but you had to do a split to have it on the MLS to offer an incentive. They had dropped that a few years ago to $1. So it's already been only $1 required. And then just recently, right after the verdict, they dropped it to zero already. So that change had already been made. You no longer, as a listing agent, have to offer a split to a buyer's agent in order to bring that buyer to the sale. Okay. So this is one thing. Okay. And I mean, as a seller, it might not be smart for you to offer 0% commission, right? And the reason why is because, if you don't offer any split to a buyer's agent that's working with buyers, then there's no incentive there for that buyer to sell your property, to push your property and show it to his buyers. Now, obviously, ethically, we can't um, say, hey, we're not going to show this property because they're offering no, because, in our buyer's best interest, that might be the perfect house for them. So ethically, we can't just say, well, hey, they're not offering me a commission split, so I'm not going to show you this house. That wouldn't exactly be right. So that puts us in a little bit of a precarious position if we're working with a buyer, right? Now, we'll get into later as also part of these changes that we may see now that it's put on the buyer to have to perhaps cover a commission if a seller doesn't cover it. Buyers might tell us, our clients might tell us, well, hey, if that seller is not willing to pay the buyer's agent commission, don't even show me those houses. So that is totally up to the buyer to decide what he looks at and what he's willing to make an offer on. We can't really tell him, but this may be, and we're going to get to this toward the end of this may be one of the possible challenges to this new decision. But also getting back to the three big changes, um, realtors and MLS participants must now have a buyer broker agreement executed prior to any touring of any homes, and final compensation cannot exceed what is agreed in the buyer broker agreement. So there's two parts to that. So now, um, and this actually could be somewhat of a positive for buyers agents in a way. Um, some brokers and some agents already use a buyer broker agreement, and they won't go work with any buyer that doesn't sign an exclusive buyer agreement with them. So the positive in that is this could weed out the situations where we get a bunch of different internet leads in, or leads from Zillow and Realtor and things like that, and then we go show them a bunch of houses and then they just ghost us, or then they call their brother-in-law who actually has his real estate license and get them to write the offer and cut us out. um, they We're not going to have that anymore, because in order for a buyer now to go tour houses with a realtor and have representation, they're going to have to sign and agree to a buyer broker exclusive agreement that we are actually working for them in a legal capacity and only representing them, and they're guaranteeing us a certain amount of commission. That will also be negotiable, but they're guaranteeing us said commission. So, you know, like I said, on the realtors, on the buyer's agent side, this could possibly be a plus, a positive in a sense, because like I said, it's going to get rid of the tire kickers. It's going to get rid of the people who are wishy-washy or are just calling you and getting through on Zillow so they could jump in a property on a Sunday, even though they know they're working with a real estate agent already. That we're not going to have all these overlapping, people working with multiple real estate agents anymore, because now they've got to put their money where their mouth is. And no agent's going to be able to go take them and start touring them around properties without this signed broker agreement. So um, now number three in the big changes is that they are going to no longer allow us as listing agents putting a house in the MLS to advertise like we did before and show what the split is, what the broker, what the buyer's agent commission split that we're taking out of our commission and offering to a buyer's agent is. It's no longer going to be in the MLS. And they went as far as to say that it can no longer be on any of the websites that draw their information from the MLS. So that is anything IDX feed, such as a Zillow, a Realtor, a Homes.com, Lofty, a KV Core, any of these type of websites. None of these websites are now going to be able to show up front what that commission split is, right? So, their whole premise here for this lawsuit was that the commissions were not transparent enough, that it wasn't obvious enough what these consumers and what these sellers were paying for the commissions. And yet, part of their settlement here is to take away the advertising that shows up front what the commission is. So, in my opinion, that's kind of backwards. That's not in the interest of transparency. Now you're hiding the commission from everybody. Nobody can see what the split is. So, you know, again, these what you call it here, these news articles saying, hey, the 6% commission on buying and selling a home is gone. And now it's going to be more affordable for buyers to buy a home because they're not going to have to pay this hefty commission anymore. It's totally wrong because all it's doing is just shifting the burden from the seller, who actually is the one that was profiting off the deal. The seller is the one who's actually selling the home and thus, transferring some of their equity now back into cash. They're taking a profit, they're selling a product. A buyer's just coming to the table trying to buy. So in my opinion, it was done the right way. The person that's actually making the profit off of this is the one who, should be paying the commission to sell the property and profit off of it. And the buyer, they're already, think of a young first-time home buyer, they're already saving up the money that they need to put a down payment if they're not in a jurisdiction where they can get 100% loan. And they're already having to come up with their first year of tax and insurance and all their escrow fees we call closing costs, right? So now what the country's telling them and what this lawsuit's telling everybody is that now, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Young couple that are looking for a house, not only do you have to have your down payment and your closing costs, but you've also got to pay your own way. You've got to pay your buyer's agent to represent you. So if you want representation, which you need, and we'll explain why, you've got to also come up with a commission. So how is that more beneficial for a buyer? That's a big question. And I think it remains to be answered. How is that cheaper for the consumer? If you ask me, it's raising the entry level for a young person or for, a renter to try to get into home ownership. And, we'll talk about that as we discuss at the end, but I really feel like a big part of this put together lawsuit and the headlines following it and everything involved has been just that, has been to actually raise the entry level and make it further unaffordable for buyers to be able to get into the house, to home ownership and get into a home. I mean, really the only people that this thing benefits, if you will, is the sellers of the home, which sellers of homes are already making a profit off of selling their home, right? And a lot of sellers are not just couples that are selling their single family home. We're talking about builders, we're talking about institutional investors, flippers, all of these people. These people, it's a business to them to sell property and make money, and they don't want to pay a commission and they don't want to pay a buyer's agent to incentivize them to bring a buyer. So it's becoming it's becoming a murky water here for a little bit as we navigate this new thing and figure out how we're going to do it moving forward. So now basically what they're telling us is that they want us to pre-negotiate our buyer side if we're working with a buyer commission and get a broker agreement signed with this buyer up front, right? And that now, as part of an offer, commissions can be negotiable. So in other words, here's one instance. We're working with a buyer. We get them to sign the a buyer representation agreement for 3%, and that they agree as part of their transaction, they're going to guarantee our 3% commission. And we make an offer on a house that we showed them to the listing agent. And in that offer, we say, well, okay, buyer requests that seller pay 3% of the sale price as buyer's agent commission, right? So now it's up to the seller to look at that offer as compared to any other offers he might have got in and decide whether or not he's willing to pay a buyer's agent commission or not. And he may come back and counter it and say, well, no, I'm not willing to pay a buyer's agent commission. At which case, what happens to our buyer if we're really with a buyer that's kind of cash strapped and is barely qualifying for this loan and really wants this house? How do we navigate that? What happens to that deal? If they can't really move forward with that deal, the deal falls apart. So this is kind of one of the big questions moving forward. You know, we couldn't see up front what the seller was willing to do. And we know the buyer already agreed that they're going to cover us. And obviously, we've done all this work. We're not going to work for free. So now what happens? What happens to that deal? What it seems like to me is that in some situations, this is really going to be to the detriment of a buyer because there's going to be certain homes that they're going to be able to make an offer on and afford, and now some that they're not if a seller's not willing to pay a listing commission, right? And so how does that affect sellers? Well, when a seller is trying to sell a property, there's a certain buyer pool we know of people that are on the market in that specific area and looking to move at that time, right? So as the seller, if you or somebody who decides you're going to be greedy and you're not willing to pay a listing or a sales agent a part of the commission, and so what happens when the majority of those buyers in your area can't afford to look at your listing now, and it starts to sit on the market for whatever 150 days or a year? What you think is going to happen to the sale price of that property, right? You're gonna reduce your price and you're gonna take less. That's what I would think, right? I mean, when the demand goes down, and the demand will go down because there'll be less people that can afford that property, then obviously the sale price inevitably goes down. The inventory starts to go up, and you end up taking less. So, my advice to Mr. Seller is don't be greedy. Don't say you're not going to offer a commission split for a buyer's agent to bring a buyer, because if you do that, it's really just going to be the detriment of you selling that property for the most amount of money you can get, right? Because when half the buyer pool now can't afford to pay a buyer's commission, and you, the one actually taking the profits, not willing to take a little bit of your profit to incentivize a buyer's agent to come, your house is going to sit and it's not going to sell. One of our biggest tools as a listing agent is to offer a commission split to a buyer's agent to entice them to bring their buyer to sell your home faster, right? Wouldn't you guys agree? So I think there's definitely some challenges here. Um, and there's going to be some workarounds. Um, Obviously, it may create more work for us when we're working with the buyer, because now instead of just giving them a list of houses and letting them pick whatever ones they want to see without any information about possible commissions involved, now we kind of got to do a little bit of due diligence possibly and do a little bit of work, because if we know we're working with a buyer who says, hey, um, you know, we don't have the money to do all of this and pay you a commission, and we really only want to look at homes that they're willing, that's broker protected, that the seller is willing to pay some of the commission to you, then now we've got to get on the horn and we've got to call all of these listing agents and say, hey, is your seller offering a split? Because my clients really are not in a position to pay 3% commission, and they want to know before they even have me show them your house whether or not they are going to have to pay their own commission split on this one, or whether your seller is willing to pay it out of the profit from the sale. So it may create us a little bit more work right now in the beginning. We may have to call and kind of vet some of these sellers first to see who's willing to do a commission split before we show people houses, right? And not because we decide not to show it to them, but because these buyers might say, hey, we can't afford a house in this price range unless the seller's willing to offer some type of split. Make sense? So that might cause us a little bit of work up front. Um, Also, as listing agents on the listing side, you know, it's up to us to decide if we want to work for a seller or not, right? I mean, we're not forced to take on more clients. It's still our business and we can still run it the way we want to run it within guidelines. So if we go on a listing presentation and we find that this seller is, in our opinion, unreasonable and is telling us right up front, I don't care what offer you put in front of me, I will not pay a percentage to any buyer's agent. They got to pay their own agent. It's up to us to say, hey, Mr. Seller, you know what? I don't think we're a good fit because our our tool, one of our biggest tools in trying to market and sell your home is to offer this split to a buyer's agent. And we know that it's going to make it a lot more difficult to sell this home and that the home might sit on the market a lot longer as we carry the cost of marketing it and running ads and we're not willing to take that bigger risk. So if you won't offer a commission split to a buyer's agent and you're telling us that up front right now, I think we're going to pass on this listing, right? We have that ability, and if a lot of agents would kind of come together and have that attitude right now that we're gonna keep somewhat of a standard of practice, then this would somewhat self-regulate itself, regardless of what they're passing right now, in my opinion. But you're always gonna have the hungry discount listing agencies that are willing to take it and put it on the MLS and market it. And they don't spend a whole lot of money. They put a sign in the yard and they put their hands together and pray somebody comes along and makes an offer, right? A lot of these discount brokerages are claiming that they full service listing, but they're not. They don't do what teams like us do as far as marketing a home and spending money and doing all the multimedia and all the social media ads and all the flyers and all the different print things and things that we do. They just don't do it. Okay. They go to sellers and they act like they're gonna do it, but they don't. They don't spend any money. So anyway, there's always gonna be, and you'll find that there'll be some discount brokerages out there that are licking their chops right now. They're definitely ready to take advantage of this and list homes cheaper. Um, but then I think it's going to be to the detriment of everybody, and especially, like we said, to the buyers, to these poor buyers who are barely in the position. They're trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they don't have a lot of money. So now they're getting stuck with a buyer's end commission. So how is this protecting the consumer? I don't know. But another thing that we can do, and another way to look at it, is that we could, when we go to a listing presentation, negotiate our percentage, let's say 3%. Let's say, okay, Mr. Seller, it's going to cost you 3% for us to market your property. Um, and I won't make you commit to an amount yet that you're going to offer as a buyer agent split, but I would like to put as part of our listing details that it is broker protected and that you are willing to negotiate a commission split that you're willing to pay to a buyer agent to bring their buyer to the table. And if you do that, you're going to attract a lot more buyers because at least these buyers know that, well, hey, in this negotiation, this seller is amicable and he is willing to pay some of my agents, if not all of my buyer's agents' commission as part of his profit and part of the deal. So this is probably the situation and the way things are kind of gonna pan out in the future is that as long as we know that our seller is willing to negotiate some percentage of the sale with the correct offer to pay some buyer's agent commission, then he doesn't have to commit to the exact amount first because now that amount is being negotiated by the buyers with their agent as part of the buyer broker agreement that we talked about before, right? So, and as part of this new legislation, they won't allow a buyer's agent to get paid more than they've agreed to with their buyers. So y'all heard that? I'm gonna say that again. So now, as part of this new settlement, if you agree with your buyers, hey, you're gonna pay me 3% as part of your cost of doing business for us to represent you. And we go to make an offer. And then that offer, that seller was willing to pay 4%, right? There's a bonus. They were adding an extra percentage on top, which we do see. And that's the big question moving forward. How is this going to affect bonuses, right? Because that's another tool that we have with listing agents. Sometimes is when a house is not selling fast enough. Sometimes we say, hey, we're going to give a $5,000 bonus if a buyer's agent could bring us a buyer within the next 30 days and we can close by X date. We'll offer an extra $5,000 incentive. Now they're basically telling us that we can't take that now, that whatever percentage and whatever price that we negotiated with our buyer and our buyer broker agreement, a seller can't pay more than that, even if they want to. So that's going to also be something that we're going to have to kind of figure out more of how that's going to shake out and play out with this lawsuit. It's all still so new. Some of what I'm proposing here is hypotheticals, and there's still a lot of what if involved in this, right? So um, there's some questions that need to be answered. Now, let's see, moving forward. There's also some other questions that are possible challenges to all of this. Is that and that okay? We work with and have worked a lot with, and we kind of, so far, especially in Louisiana, our team has worked with a lot of VA buyers, right? VA meaning Veterans Administration. So people that have been military that qualify for a VA loan, which is 100% financing. They don't come out of pocket with a down payment for a VA loan at all. All they got to have is their closing cost and they can make an offer on a house. Well, there's regulations that VA puts in place. And as part of VA's regulations, VA doesn't allow their buyer to pay a commission to anyone. So now how does this whole deal affect VA buyers? On one hand, they're telling us, hey, your buyers have got to sign a buyer broker agreement with you, right? And on the other hand, VA saying, well, our buyers can't pay a commission. So what happens to VA buyers now? So that's a big question right now that needs to be answered. And then again, like I said before, what happens to the cash strapped young buyer who really is, using an RD 100% loan or, is barely qualifying debt to income ratio. And when we throw this commission on them, that makes it unaffordable. What happens to them? You know, um, we're going to see. This is definitely shaking up the industry, and we're going to try to think positively about it. And obviously, as a strong team, we definitely are going to navigate this to the best of our ability. And we've got to stick within our guidelines that we're given. And I don't think that the industry is going to fall apart and go away, but there is going to be some changes as we move forward. This whole headline about 6% commissions are gone. No, it's not. Because first of all, it never really was 6% commissions. It was always negotiable, and it was always split between the two, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, for coming together and procuring the deal for the buyer and seller and making the deal work, right? So nobody really got a full 6%. The only time that you might is if you had the listing and you found a buyer and you brought them to the table and were dual agent and you got your full commission because you did both sides of the work, right? So in that situation, I don't even know. That's another big question. What about dual agency now? What happens there? We've got to work on both sides of it, and we only make half the commission. You know, in Louisiana we have dual agency. Our Florida team we do not. It's illegal here, but we have something called transition into a transactional brokerage where we still are working both sides of the deal, but yet we pulling away our fiduciary responsibility. So we're not legally representing one side or the other. We're just facilitating the transaction. But in that case, we still keep the full commission amount that we've agreed to and that the sellers have agreed to pay. Now, in many cases, as part of our listing presentation, we tell people that, hey, if we're going to be dual agent or transactional brokerage and we don't have to pay a split to another brokerage, we'll save you some money. We'll knock off an additional percentage point. And we do that. And I especially do that with my builder and investor clients that, work with us a lot. And I do try to pre-sell their builds and pre-sell their homes. And that way, you know, instead of making just 3%, we may make 3.5 or 4%, but we're saving them 2% and saving them, whatever, $10,000, $20,000 or so. So everybody walks away happy, but it's always up front in the beginning, the way that's going to go. Like I said before, as part of we can't advertise an amount as a listing agent now, but we can at this point, from what I understand, and they may change this because it's not a done deal, um, say, hey, you know, as part of the realtor notes, hey, my seller is willing to entertain requests for contribution to buyer's agent's commission. Please submit with your offer, right? So that's kind of the way this is going to go now, is that anytime we make an offer for somebody now, we've got to put it in the offer, which as realtors, as buyer's agent, if you're working as a buyer's agent, scares me a little bit, right? And I think it should kind of scare everybody a little bit because, you know, now they putting this deal on the line that part of the negotiation is our pay. So when everything else is negotiable in a deal between a buyer and seller, except for our pay, how do we hold back the deal? Like they're going to be looking at us like, well, can you lower your commission now? Even though the buyer's already agreed and signed that they're going to pay us a certain amount of commission. And then, you know, ethically, how do we handle that? We've worked for our pay. We shouldn't really have to lower. I mean, we've done all of our end of the bargain and we've represented them, but yet it may hinge on us lowering our commission to be able to make this deal work if we got a seller who's being unreasonable and only willing to pay a certain amount, right? So I see this being a little bit of a challenge and kind of making us look bad, even though we shouldn't, right? I mean, we did our job. They agreed to pay us what they were going to pay us from the beginning. But if if that sell again, if the deal's tight and the buyer's cash trapped and the seller's not willing to budge, and the only thing that's holding this deal up is it comes down to our pay, our commission, what do we do? Do we hold strong and say, no, sorry, I did my job and you agreed to pay me? Technically, legally, that's what we should do. But then, you know, is that what's really in the best interest for our buyer? I mean, most of these buyers become our friends. We want them as repeat buyers and clients for life, right? I mean, I know right now we've got 100% five-star reviews and we've got the best in Zillow badge and we've got a whole bunch of good clients that have become repeat clients for over the 10 years. I hadn't had too many that were dissatisfied at this point enough to not work with us or refer us to anybody. But what happens when when our commission is the whole only reason somebody doesn't get their dream home? So this is definitely something that, I don't want to be one of the negative Nancy's out there and say that this is going to totally screw up our industry because I don't think. I think we're going to navigate through it and it's going to become the new normal, if you will. But I think also at the same time, um, it's putting us in a precarious situation and it's putting the buyer in a precarious situation, you know. So, I know what some people are thinking. Mr. Consumer's probably thinking, well, you know what? I just won't use a buyer's agent. I'll just go straight to the listing agent, right? And you're going to have some people that do that. But is that really smart for you, Mr. Buyer? I mean, you're going to go to the person that has a legal responsibility and a fiduciary duty that's working for the person selling the house. And their responsibility is to get the most money and the best deal for their seller. And you're going to go directly to that person and negotiate with them directly without having representation on your side of somebody to negotiate on your behalf. I think that's a recipe for disaster. There's a lot of things, not just negotiating on the price, that come into play when we represent a buyer, right? I mean, one is we make sure we get a good inspector for them and we get the house inspected properly, and that way there's nothing that is hidden that could possibly be a defect that they didn't tell us about. If our inspector finds some different defects and some problems, would it be a major plumbing problem or termite damage that was found or a roof leak or something electrical, a major issue, we negotiate with that listing agent that has their seller on the other side, and we all come to an agreement. Well, okay, you're going to repair these things, or we're not going to move forward, or you're going to give us a certain amount of credit to closing that we're going to use to repair these things. And, you know, we make sure that gets held correctly in escrow and divvied out to our buyer at closing, or to the contractor who's going to perform the repairs. And we navigate that whole situation for a buyer. We make sure that we're there and the house gets through appraisal. We have all the standard disclosures and legal documents and things, and we make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, and that there's nothing left out of the paperwork that could possibly come back to haunt Mr. Buyer in the end if there were to be a litigation and a lawsuit, right? And we have the errors and omissions insurance that protects us for millions of dollars in case we make a mistake on that. So, Mr. Buyer, is it really in your best interest to go purchase a home without any representation? I mean, would you go to a major court case and represent yourself if it was something on the line, like the biggest purchase of your life is with a home? Would you go um, take out your own appendix and not see a doctor, and not use a professional in some situations? It's not smart, you know, and especially when it comes to a major purchase like real estate, which is one of the most litigated, if not the most litigated and sue happy industries of our whole world, of our whole country. So um, I think it's opening up a recipe again to the detriment of buyers, because now a buyer is forced to have to choose between whether they can afford having representation or if they've got to go directly to a listing agent to save a little money, but yet possibly be taken advantage of. Now, I'm not saying every listing agent out there is a shark and every seller is trying to hide some latent defects or something, but hey, it happens every day, right? People try to take advantage of people every day. And I don't know if Holly jumped in to, she didn't, I think, because she had to work, but I can tell you right now, and we'll get Holly to tell us her story, but Jamie and Holly, my good friends, Jamie, one of my best friends in the world, they bought a house a few years ago here in Boca Raton when the market was to the height of the market and there were multiple offers and things. And it was a flip property that a flipper had taken and bought that was very distressed and slapped it back together. And um, they dealt directly with the listing agent. Excuse me. And they've had a nightmare to this date. They found out that the house was riddled with mold, that there were several leaks. They've had to spend countless amounts of money and time and even the health of their family in this situation, because this listing agent rushed them through the process. They didn't get a very good inspection. The inspector didn't even check parts that they really should have checked. And had they had a buyer's agent that was working strictly in their behalf, like us, they would have not made these mistakes. They wouldn't have moved forward with the deal, because they would have had somebody watching their back with an inspector that we trust, and they wouldn't have been taken advantage of like they were. Right. So this is an actual real life case. And this is one of our agents, Holly, that went through this situation and is still going through it. I mean, just in the past couple of months, they've had to replace a whole entire exterior wall and an interior wall in their little girl's bedroom because it was full of mold. Right. So they were taken advantage of. Right. And they don't really, because they didn't have a buyer representation of an agent that was working for them, they almost don't have a leg to stand on. And, they're not even suing for it. They're just utilizing insurance and trying to do the best they can with this, because they really didn't have all of their documents in a row, because they dealt directly with that listing agent who took advantage of them. And so did this seller, and sold them a house that was no good for their family. And that's where they live in now. The good news is for them, because of the rate and equity increases that we've had over the past couple of years, especially here in South Florida, from the amount that they purchased it for to the amount and the value that it's worth now, they've earned quite a bit of equity. So even, having to offset some of that equity because they've had to spend a bunch of money and time and headache, they actually are still going to sell this house for a profit in the long run, because they bought in the right place at the right time. So there's a little bit of a silver lining in it for them. But that is an actual real world example of somebody that we know that was taken advantage of as a buyer because they went directly to the listing agent, right? Y'all still with me?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing how, because they're advertising it as it's a complete benefit towards the buyer. I fail to see how it benefits the buyer really in any way.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think they're lying. I think they flat out lying. And this is just a conversation right now between us, and my professional opinion and my personal opinion on this is that they did this on purpose, just like they raised the interest rates, just like they're allowing the insurance companies to double and triple and quadruple their rates. Um, it's been indicative of everything that this current administration that we're under right now has done to the country as far as, causing everything to be unaffordable from groceries to gas prices to home ownership. And so I think it's being done on purpose. Um, and, I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame. I think they're doing it under the guise of saving the consumer when the consumer is actually the buyer. They're not saving the consumer at all. They're saving their cronies that are buying up all the properties and selling them for a profit, you know? A whole nother, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I don't know if you guys know it, but over the past year or two, 40% or so, and you could check that statistic, I may not be exactly on the money, but about 40% of single family home and multifamily home residential real estate has been purchased by institutional investors. When I say institutional investors, I mean the big hedge funds, the big companies. There's a few of them out there. BlackRock is one of the biggest ones, and they are buying up residential real estate at an alarming rate, and they're even doing it through their subsidiaries. I actually did a deal on one for a buyer, where one of BlackRock's subsidiaries called Home Partners of America came in and purchased this home for the end user and she didn't quite qualify because of the way her income is structured. She couldn't quite qualify for a loan on her own, although she did show income in her bank account and had a pretty decent, credit score. She didn't quite qualify to purchase this home. So she went through this program, Home Partners of America, and Home Partners of America, under the guise of helping her get into a rental and purchasing this rental on her behalf, scooped up another property in one of our markets, and now they own it. So that's one of the ways that they're gobbling up properties, um, and that also has led to the somewhat of the uncertainties in the market in general, because that we know that they've kept the prices high because the demand, even though the demand dropped, the inventory is still low. And part of the reason the inventory is still low is because these institutional buyers are coming in and scooping up a lot of what's on the market and buying them cash. And so they're competing with the end user, the young couple, the actual home buyer families out there. They're competing with families and buying some of these properties up cash before couples can buy them. And that's kind of creating somewhat of an artificial scarcity. And we know the inventory has stayed relatively low. Even though with interest rates up over the past year and insurance prices up, the demand from the average buyer has gone way down in the past year, right? But yet the prices still hung super high because the institutional buyers are scooping them up cash, right? So I think, just again with me and you guys, I think this, in my personal opinion, has been um, somewhat of contrived, well-timed thing that they do, and under the guise of helping consumers, when actually what they're doing is just helping their cronies and causing home ownership for families to become more and more unaffordable as they push more people into having to rent. They want to own up all the property and have renters renting everything. They don't want home ownership, you know? And why? Because we know that owning property and home ownership is the fastest way to stability and putting you above the poverty line and developing any kind of wealth for your family and generations going forward. It is the most solid way that's less risky, um, and they don't like it. I think they don't want people to come up, past the poverty line. They want to keep people below the poverty line. So I think this whole thing has been done and orchestrated, in my opinion. Now, call me a conspiracy theorist, but when you start seeing, and I'll go back to, you know, Google, if you just Google realtor commission gone, you see that they're using the same exact headline 6% commission is gone. Six, that's NBC, that's CNN, that's CBS, that's NPR, that's ABC, that's Fox, all of them saying the exact same thing, which is actually misleading and wrong. It's not gone. It's just now structured a little bit differently. Um, but when you start seeing that, you know, um, anyway, all right. So it's been an hour. Um, I hope this has kind of helped. I guess we'll continue this conversation going forward. I just kind of wanted to get us all on the same page. Before I let you go, I think what we will start having to do is we'll start having to develop our presentation to buyers. We will have, if you didn't see it in the LPT Motivational Monday, they are developing us a really nice buyer broker agreement with a little pamphlet that really explains to buyers what we do for them and our value, as well as, right at the end, they're able to sign the buyer broker agreement. So we're going to practice giving buyer consultations just like we practice listing presentations. And we're going to be okay moving forward. We're going to figure out how to navigate this. And, hopefully, as listing agents, people are able to explain to their sellers, hey, it's not in your best interest to not entertain offers, and paying a commission to buyers agents. And we work this out, you know. So we'll continue to follow it. We'll continue to discuss it. If you guys have any other questions about it, obviously feel free to call me. And if I don't know the answer, we'll try to figure out the answer together moving forward. But right now, stay positive. Yes, it's a change. Yes, it's a shakeup. Some of you guys that are new to the industry, it's not gonna be as big a change to you because you hadn't done a whole lot of deals doing it the other way before. So you'll just have to get used to doing it this new way. Um, when I first started in the business, almost 10 years ago or so, was right after the big bubble burst with the subprime mortgage bubble. And by 2015, they had come out with some settlements and they came with new regulation called TRID as part of the RESPA deal. I'm sure you guys have heard that now. And when that whole deal was coming about, everybody was freaking out, especially in the mortgage industry, because it was definitely changing up the regulations and making it more strict for the mortgage industry. And the title companies and realtors and everybody was saying, "Oh, that's it, the industry's over, and we'll never do this again," and da da da. And you know what? We saw it come and go. My first few deals as a realtor, I did them the old way, and then I wasn't that long in the business. I remember that October when RESPA took effect, and I closed a deal like the week RESPA took effect, and there wasn't even much of a big bump in the road. Everybody kind of just adjusted to the new regulations and the new HUD going to a CD statement and some of the different changes, and we got past it, and we've been selling real estate strong ever since then. So, that being said, I wouldn't freak out about this too much. There is some unanswered questions. We are going to have to work through some changes, but we have value both as listing agents and as buyer's agent. And it's not in the best interest of the consumer to try to go about this without us. That's what the country wants. They don't want us getting paid. They want buyers to just go to Zillow and make an offer on Zillow and not have somebody represent them. But look, it's not good. That's not the way. And it's not going to be. it may take for some people to get sued and some people to really get taken advantage of before people start to realize, wait a minute, I need my realtor to back me through this situation. And so anyway, all right, guys. Well, let's maybe pick up again next week and do another Zoom and we'll discuss this situation a little bit more. I think we'll probably see more of what's going to fall and what's going to really stick once we know what's actually accepted in this settlement, because right now it's not totally accepted. So, anyway, thank y'all.